Mhm. Hello and welcome to FACT's webinar, Commercial Targeted Grazing with Goats 101. Our guest presenter, Aaron Steele, is here with us. I'm Catherine Hoke, FACT's Humane Farming Program Assistant, and I'll be moderating this session. Thank you for joining us. Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT, is a national nonprofit organization that works to ensure that all food-producing animals are raised in a humane and healthy manner. We accomplish this by supporting humane farmers and through our humane farming program, promoting policies that make food from animals safe and healthy to eat through our Safe and Healthy Foods program, and generally help consumers make informed choices. Please visit our website, foodanimalconcerns.trust.org, to learn more. At this time, I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed presenter, Aaron Steele. Aaron is the founder of Goats on the Go, a national network of targeted grazing service providers who use goat and sheep to sustainably manage vegetation for their customers. Aaron launched Goats on the Go in 2012 as an unconventional way to take his small farm beyond a hobby in an environment where expensive land, questionable practices, and a bigger is better mentality are the norms. Goats on the Go now licenses its brands, training, and support to others, building a community of entrepreneurs who seek to operate profitable farms no matter their entry point or size. Aaron holds a bachelor's degree and MBA from Iowa State University. We're super lucky to have such a wonderful presenter with us today. And without further ado, I'll turn the floor over to you, Aaron. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Catherine, and thanks to everybody who's joined today. I'm just going to take a moment here and pull up my presentation. There we go. Yeah, thank you everybody for joining. I really appreciate that you turned out for this today, and I'm excited to share with you some information about targeted grazing as a business and a little bit about our company as well. So let's just start there. As Catherine mentioned in my bio, we started Goats on the Go here in Ames, Iowa, central Iowa in 2012. In 2016, after having some initial successes, but also experiencing lots of mistakes and corrections of mistakes, we felt like we had a little experience under our belts, and we began offering our brand and our training and our support to other people who wanted to start their own targeted goat grazing businesses. And so today I'll talk about that more a little later perhaps, but just for context, we have Goats on the Go operators all across the US and one in Canada. We have about 75 of those in 25 states. So we are spreading out quite a bit, and that has allowed us to gain even more knowledge and experience because all of these tiny businesses operating under the Goats on the Go brand are sharing information together. And so we try to get better and better every year at what we do. What I'm going to present to you today is truly targeted grazing with goats 101. So we're just going to touch on the most basic things, and I'm going to try to do that quickly. And then I'm going to use your questions to take us into 201 level and even graduate level if your questions lead us there. I'm sure there's some things that we'll leave out, but I just want to hit the highlights for you and see where you'd like to take the conversation. A great place to start that conversation is, what is targeted grazing? Goats on the Go is a targeted grazing operation and a targeted grazing brand. I love this definition. It's been quoted and requoted so many times that it's actually hard to track down its origins. I think it comes from the American Sheep Industry's Targeted Grazing Handbook way back in 2006. But it's important to note that targeted grazing, as we're going to talk about it today, and as I experience it as a business, is more this definition than what some of us hear sometimes, which is goat rental. Maybe you've heard that terminology. And goat rental is a great shorthand, but it doesn't completely capture this definition. And the point of this definition is that as we provide this service of targeted grazing with goats to customers, we are doing it with the input of our customers and with a defined strategy for accomplishing specific goals. And that strategy includes timing, and it includes the number of animals, and it includes the size of closure we put the animals in, and our identification of the plants and the goals we have for those plants and the ground from which they grow. So it is more than just goat rental, even though I find myself using that term sometimes. Um, it is a broad strategy, comprehensive sort of thing that we provide as a service to customers. And we do that primarily with goats. However, targeted grazing has sort of been happening in North America since long before European settlement. We have huge, at least used to have huge grazing herds of grazing animals on the landscape, and they impacted that landscape in a way that was both natural and in a way that actually shaped the vegetation makeup on the landscape. And so when we use goats for targeted grazing, we're trying to replicate that a little bit. These large herds grazed densely, large animals in a relatively small space, constantly moved onward, both by their defecating and urinating and trampling and kind of ruining the vegetation that was there, at least for a brief period, but also by predators moving them along constantly. We do the same thing, except we use goats, and we try to mimic their movement using fences. So grazing is a great way to manage vegetation of all types. It requires no herbicide or perhaps less herbicide. It requires no mechanization or perhaps less mechanization. It requires no burning or perhaps less burning. And that's kind of a significant thing. The other major force besides grazing on the landscape before the North America was broadly settled was fire. And we still use fire here in the Midwest, especially a lot, to maintain native establishments and other types of grassland vegetations and woodland vegetation, in fact. Fire is natural in a sense, but I would suggest that any acre of land in the U.S. historically was probably grazed way more often than it was burned. If you think about the natural circumstances which would have had to all intersect in order for a naturally occurring fire to break out, the right moisture of the plants, the right moisture in the air, the right storm coming by at the right time, the right strike of lightning. So, and burning comes with a big carbon release into the atmosphere. And so I think it's great that we have a means now for reincorporating grazing into the management of vegetation on the landscape. Goats also work on difficult and dangerous terrain, and they save labor. We're able to do things with goats that would be very challenging or even dangerous for people to do. And we provide all sorts of complementary benefits at the same time. So if grazing's good, or can be managed in a way that's good, why aren't we using those bison? Why aren't we using those elk? Why are we using goats? Well, I joke with people that goats are a lot easier to get on a trailer than bison are. And that's absolutely true, but goats have some real advantages for the way we're using them in a highly managed way. They're technically browsers. I think most people don't really understand that term, so I don't use it very much. But if you watch goats go wandering through an area of fresh vegetation, you will see that they are selecting things that they like. They're picking from all the choices, and have their heads mostly at eye level or even looking upward. Their eyes don't go and noses don't go immediately to the ground for the vegetation that they want to eat. That creates or kind of complements a preference for problem plant species. Many of the invasive and nuisance plants that we deal with here in North America are tall, woody brush or broadleaf weeds. There are some plants that we target with goats that are actually like ground cover plants, but that's the exception rather than the rule. This is just a coincidence, by the way. We didn't train our goats to like invasive and nuisance plants. It's just that if you give them a lot of things to choose from, goats are going to eat those woody broadleaf species, and those tend to be the ones that we don't like in the United States. They don't actually spread seeds to a great degree. So you would think that any plant that is eaten by a goat, any seeds that were around at the time would just be consumed by the goat and pass through the system of the goat and be expelled with a fresh dose of fertilizer. That's actually not the case. It varies between what type and species of seed, but there's been good research done that shows that there are not very many seeds that remain viable after passing through the system of a goat. They are very agile, so rough terrain is no problem. If you know goats at all, you know that they will find the highest spot that they can find and immediately climb onto it. I have been working on my shed roof before, and I tossed a scrap of roof tin down on the ground, millimeters thick, and I looked down at the goats, and they have rushed over and they're fighting over who gets to stand on it. That's just the way goats are. There is virtually no erosion if we do a good job of managing goats because they are so light-footed. Compaction and trailing aren't the same issues that they would be with cattle, for example. Because they prefer these plants that we don't like, they take this wasted resource and even a food source that we would like to get rid of, and they convert it into meat. That's critical for my operation because we are a meat goat operation too. Not all goats on the go operators are also meat goat operations, but it's important to my farm. And I think that if it's one of the most important components to making this work well, that targeted grazing be the gravy or the icing on top of some other function for your goats. That's a deep rabbit hole we could go down into, and we'll do that if you like here in a little bit. And goats offer huge advantages in the fact that they are cute. And I don't mean that just superficially. I mean it in a pragmatic sort of way. Goats engage humans. And so many of our customers are public entities, conservation groups. They manage land or try to manage land in an ecologically sound way. And they have a dual mission. One is to manage that land that they're in charge of. The other is to engage the public and educate the public about those efforts. And so you see here, these are just kids who came across the street to one of our projects in a public park from the local school. It wasn't even planned. It wasn't an official field trip, but you see the teacher in the background there. What a great opportunity this teacher has to talk to his kids about carbon sequestration, about soil microbiology, about removing invasive plants that have very shallow roots along the lakeshore, which is where we were, and replacing them with native plants that have deep roots that infiltrate water and hold soil in place so we don't get runoff into the lake. What a great opportunity to even talk about agriculture and the biology of these very unique animals. And so the engaging nature of goats is definitely an advantage for a targeted grazing operation. So let's talk about the plants a little bit. Here are like the menu for my plants here in the Midwest, okay? If you live in other parts of the country, these aren't all going to be the same for you, but it gives you an idea of the range that goats have. They are the most versatile animal when it comes to targeted grazing as a commercial service because they're really convenient to work with because of their size, because of the way they engage the public, but also because they have this huge breadth of things that they are willing and able to eat. So over here on the left side, we have the menu of brushy and woody species, and over on the right, more of those grassy or herbaceous types of vegetation. The ones in yellow I just highlight because the goats are picky about these. We have found them to be that way anyway. They like them at some times of the year, sometimes of the day, some points in their development or their different varying levels of maturity, and at other times they ignore them entirely. And so over on the right-hand side there, you know, if we get asked by a customer, I've got this big thistle problem, and the only thing I'm concerned about is thistle. We tend to like back away from those types of projects because we know goats will eventually eat thistles, but they might have to be there for a long time to do it. Or we may have to make the timing just perfect to get the goats there just at that one point when the goats in the thistles development, when the goats really want to eat them. And that's hard to build a business around. So that's why I point out some of those. If you were to start a goat grazing business, you would quickly learn which types of vegetation in your local area are the ones that really annoy customers and how you need to graze them and time them in order to address customers' issues. All right, so just very simply, how does this all work? I mentioned that we're going to move them across the landscape. In this case, the landscape means the customer's property and the targeted vegetation that the customer wants to reduce or get rid of using not predators, but this portable electric fencing. This is amazing stuff. If you've ever used it, you probably either love it or hate it. If you're going to be a targeted grazing operator, you need to learn to love it. And we use a portable electric fence. So all of this stuff can be set up and removed very quickly and relatively easily, depending on the environment you're working in, without leaving any marks on the land. And it can be far, far back from any road, and that's not a problem. So in the upper right here, you see some of our goats behind that portable electric fencing. In the lower right corner of that same photo, you see an inset of one of our portable electric fencers that provides power to that fencing. Well, what about virtual fencing? Some of you may have heard of that. If you look at the lower right-hand picture there, you'll see our goats have these funny things around their necks. And those are virtual fence collars that allow us to set a virtual boundary. And as the goats approach that boundary, they are warned by tones from their collars to turn around and go back the other way. And that has, as you might guess, some real important implications for not just on the farm with our goats, but out on our projects for paying customers as well. It has also big limitations that you probably don't you wouldn't think about until you actually got out there and tried to use it on a commercial targeted grazing project. But I think it is the future, and as it becomes less expensive and they work out some of the bugs, I think we're all going to be using this in probably the next 15 years. All right, back to how we do this actually on the job site. If we're doing a project that is like less than 10 acres, definitely 5 acres or less, we're probably going to throw 30 to 50 goats at it, a trailer full, whatever that is for your trailer. We're going to take that to the job site. And if we have a job that's over 10 acres, we're going to want to use at least 150 goats, maybe more like 220, 250. And then we just need to scale up from there. Over the years, we have learned that we like to shoot for doing an acre a day on those large projects. So whatever number of goats it takes to do an acre a day will be very helpful in making you profitable if you take on those large projects. Smaller projects, different logistics, different number of animals, different pricing structure. We'll get to more of that here in a little bit. I will say that most of the Goats on the Go affiliates across the country are suburban style operators. They're doing backyards and parks and trails and campuses and that sort of thing in anywhere from a seriously urban to kind of suburban rural edge type of environment. Some of our affiliates are equipped to do very large projects, and so they will do work for the various state departments of conservation or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps of Engineers, that sort of thing. But I would say the majority of our folks are operating with, well, yeah, I mean, 30 to 50 goats and operating generally within a half hour to 45-minute driving radius from their home farms. We use small paddock, short duration rotational grazing. You might know it as mob grazing. It's not much different than the highly managed regenerative type of rotational grazing you would do on the farm. We're just doing it on a customer's property, and we're doing it with vegetation that is probably a little bit different than we would have on the farm. We can combine the use of goats as a commercial service with other methods. Now, typically our affiliates don't provide those other methods, but if you wanted to have a forestry mower come in either before or after the goats, you certainly could do that. There are ways in which those different methods could be combined. And honestly, some of our customers, especially those institutional type of conservation oriented customers, they're dealing with such a big demoralizing invasive species problem that they need every tool in the toolbox. So we tend to look at goats for those customers as one more tool that they can use to start to get a handle on this challenge of invasive plants. So just to give you an idea of what this looks like, this is a fairly common backyard type of project with 30 to 50 goats. On the right there, you see the lawn, and a little further off the screen to the right would be the house. And this is, pretty common in my neck of the woods where you've got these nice large lot subdivisions, usually at the edge of a community. And the appeal of this lot for this homeowner was that it included some woods, that it dropped off to a creek at the bottom. It's a gorgeous lot, but they underestimate the challenges of maintaining that vegetation and keeping it in a way that they can actually enjoy the property. And so that's where the goats come in on a small project like that. And here's, what a large project might look like. And this is a lot of vegetation. There's probably 300 goats in that picture, and you just can't see them all. They're in there deep, and they have got a lot of eating ahead of them on this project. This is actually a power line right of way. And in this particular power line right of way, we weren't contracted to go all the way across the section from one road to the next public road. We were just supposed to go about halfway in, which meant when the job was done, we needed to backtrack all the way back to the road where we dropped the goats off to load them back onto the trailer. So we've used our electric fencing here to build an alleyway to move all of these goats back from where they came. And just another shot of a lot of goats in play. This is at a county park. This person took her walk at the same time every day, which happened to coincide with our visits to check on the goat. Absolutely loved them, so we had a great time visiting with her. And again, it just shows the public appeal, the human engagement appeal of goats. I'm going to show you some before and after pictures just so you can see what the goats can do. In this case, on the right, that's the after. On the left is the before. If any of you listening out there are Midwesterners, you can see some of these tall yellow flowers back here, and that is wild parsnip, becoming more and more common in our part of the world. It takes over roadside ditches and prairie edges and that sort of thing. It is a nasty, nasty plant. Don't go picking the yellow flowers. Quite dangerous, and you can see here that the goats love it. They didn't leave a single leaf or flower of that stuff behind. Some of these pictures, you kind of have to have a visual reference point. So over on the left side of this frame, you see this tree with the Y-shaped tree. It's going to shift a little in the next frame, but it will give you a point of reference. More toward the middle of the photo there. Before above and after below. So you notice that the goats, they're not beavers, right? They eat some crazy stuff, but ultimately they don't eat the wood itself. They'll eat bark, they'll eat back softer branch tips, oftentimes beyond the growth points, which is important for controlling that vegetation. But they will leave these skeletons of the brush behind. And that's something that we do prepare our customers for. We often say that, we'd like to know that you have a plan for follow-up after the goats leave, because it will take some follow-up, but it's going to be a much more pleasant place to work after the goats have gone through there, and your morale is going to go through the roof instead of having you feel like you just don't know where even to start with your vegetation problem. In this picture, you need to look at this clump of brush dead center in the photo, because it turns out to not be a clump of brush, but rather a shed. I don't know if the customer knew that shed was there at the time they hired this goat crew. I should say, by the way, that our 75 affiliates all across the United States, we have a photo contest every year to see who can produce the best before and after photo. So these pictures have been contributed by our affiliates in trying to win that photo contest. This was a winner of that photo contest one year. I don't even know if you can make this out, but there's a wooden beam here that looks a little like the top beam of a swing set, and there's a jungle gym there. So if it's the right kind of vegetation, goats definitely can do great work on these suburban style projects. Here we just have a really a rock promontory. At any rate, a tall piece of rock that would be hard to do anything on vegetation control wise with people. And I love this one because of the photo. Organic farm, please do not spray. And certainly our goats did not need any spray in order to produce this after photo. And on this one, you want to look at the peak of the house and the chimney up here at the top of the frame. So of course, I'm showing you these really great photos that are, show the most dramatic change. And certainly these customers were thrilled with one grazing from goats. Truth be told, if we're working with a conservation organization and they want to, their mission is to eliminate invasive plants, and eliminate means kill a large percentage of those adult mature plants, we have to have a strategy that is more than just, make a dramatic photo. We have to go into it with a multi-grazing event, multi-year approach, and get those customers to commit to that. And oftentimes that approach may include some of those other management techniques I mentioned of fire, herbicides, mechanical equipment, all of that stuff together. So I just want to talk real briefly. This is commercial targeted grazing with goats 101. And to me, that implies that if you're taking on the launch of a commercial targeted grazing service, you are signing on to be a professional. You want to be a targeted grazing pro. There's another group out there that I say somewhat facetiously is the guy with goats group. All right. It's somebody who has goats and they're not willing to be a pro. Now, there's a lot of validity to this approach too that I'll get to in a moment. But for now, I want to talk about the differences. So a targeted grazing pro manages goats and land and customers, all three of those things. A guy with goats provides goats. That person may or may not also provide transportation or may or may not provide fencing, but there's not much management or support going on there for the customer. A targeted grazing pro can identify those local problem plants. A targeted grazing pro understands how grazing will impact those local problem plants. And they'll be able to tell you, how much will a single grazing do? What will a second grazing do if it's done X number of days after the first grazing? How about that third grazing event? And how does that change depending on the timing and depending on what time of the year you start and what types of vegetation are there? The guy with goats is not interested in working closely with consumers. They would love for you to, he or she would love for you to rent their goats, but that's about the end of it. We want a brief transaction if you're in that category over there. A grazing pro understands customer goals. A grazing pro shows up, in quotes, every day. A grazing pro is insured. It's responsive. A grazing pro knows his or her costs and sets prices according to the market. Back over to the other list there, show up is optional, or it's reserved for the highest priority for the guy with goats. It's reserved for something else, but showing up every day is not necessarily a high priority. No defined structure for setting prices. And I think this is an important one. The feed value is a big deal for the guy with goats. And that's not intended to be an attack. That's just the truth. If you're approaching it from, I got to maximize the feed I get from these targeted grazing projects, you're probably not a targeted grazing pro, because a targeted grazing pro views the feed value as incidental. What you recognize once you've been doing this for a while is that, yeah, it's nice that my goats are fed every day I'm out on a project, but there are so many other concerns, so many other things I got to take care of, so many other higher priority issues for me in keeping a customer happy and pleasing a customer so I get hired again. Then, so that the feed value becomes like, yeah, it's a nice deal, but it's not the focus. Um, a targeted grazing pro has a service orientation. I am providing a service to a customer or serving a customer. Whereas a guy with goats has a product orientation. I am delivering these things to you for this amount of money for this amount of time. Um, Now, like I mentioned before, that's not all bad. I think that there is a role for the guy with goats. In fact, many of our affiliates actually rent goats or lease goats from another goat producer to provide this service to customers. But I think that the targeted grazing pro fills an important space in between there, between the guy with goats and the customer, because the targeted grazing pro is willing and able to do all the stuff on the left, whereas the guy with goats is busy with a goat. It doesn't mean you can't do both, or maybe the guy with goats has other things on his plate or on her plate. And so it's probably best if guy with goats doesn't try to serve a customer, but rather provides a product to a targeted grazing pro who then serves a customer. All right, pricing. Everybody wants to know pricing. The first questions people ask of me are, how do I know what to charge? And then how do I find the people that will pay that? And those are really great questions. And we're not going to be able to dive like deeply into that for your particular area, but let's just hit a few things here. Pricing doesn't start with the price tag. Pricing starts with knowing what your costs are in providing the service, because the goal here is to make a profit. And profit, this is this formula at the top of my column here on the left. Profit equals revenue minus costs. We don't have a profit unless we've brought in more money from the customer than it costs for us to produce the service. Okay, so we need to know what those costs are. Revenue is the price tag, but that's easy. We can put whatever price tag on it we want. Costs are the hard part. So we have fencing and equipment, insurance, marketing, software subscriptions, legal. You'll probably need to have an attorney involved at some point to help you with a customer contract or some other issue. We've got to deal with transportation of the goats, which has a different cost than transportation of the people. So for example, if on day one of a project, you have to haul all of your goats there, that transportation will cost more per mile than the days when you just have to go check a project. That transportation is relatively cheap in comparison. We have wages, which is basically a way of saying time. Time has a cost to it. So we need to be rewarded for every hour of work we put into this. And we have a goat cost. So some of you out there, that makes perfect sense, because you're thinking, maybe I'd like to start a targeted grazing business and I will need to go get goats for that business. But some of you are thinking, no, I don't have a goat cost because I have a farm that already raises goats, so my goats are free. Doesn't actually work like that. Everything of value has a cost. So what I recommend to our affiliates is that they actually pay, even if they own the goats themselves or their farm owns the goats, their targeted grazing operation over here should pay for the use of those goats to the farm. Both parties need to benefit from this transaction of value. The targeted grazing operation needs to have the goats it needs to do the project. The farm needs to benefit from loaning those goats out to somebody else, even though you're technically the same person. So if I owned a construction company and I got a contract to do a job that required a backhoe, but I don't have a backhoe, I either need to buy one or I need to rent one from somebody else. So it's no different with goats. These are just the tools, the equipment that we're using to complete the project and get our money. Here are a few pricing tips to consider. Profit on paper is not the same as feeling rewarded. So I'm going to give you some actual numbers here. We have found that most of our affiliates could show a technical on paper profit at something like $700 to $800 per acre for a project under 10 acres in size. But we've also found, and remember, we're dealing with 75 of these currently, and we've had over 100 over the years. We've also found from them that they don't feel rewarded by this, even though they're technically making a profit, until they're charging sometimes well over $1,000 per acre. So it's something to consider. Just feeling rewarded does not automatically come from making a profit, even if you can show one on paper. Your labor is an operating cost. So if you're the one actually out there setting up the fence, you need to pay yourself a wage. It's not something you just take out of profit. Profit is what's left over after you've paid yourself a wage. Why? Because if you don't do the work, somebody has to, and you'll have to pay that person a wage. So you have to pay yourself a reasonable wage in order to know what your profit is going to be on the other end. Costs are different from place to place, so prices need to be different too. This is why it's going to be hard for me to tell you what you should charge for a targeted grazing service. Customers are different from place to place, so prices should be too, right? We talked about a grazing pro responds to the market. Some markets are more willing to pay for targeted grazing than others. So if I told you should charge $900 per acre, but you're in an area that could support $3,000 an acre, I would not be doing you a favor. So you need to respond to the local market. I recommend that you use bulk pricing. If I get a jar of pickles, a gallon jar of pickles at Costco, and I compare it to the tiny little jar of pickles I got at the convenience store, which is going to have the smaller or larger price per pickle? It's no different with targeted grazing. As we do larger and larger projects for a customer, or they commit to longer and longer management plans using goats, we need to reduce the price per acre. Now we get some real benefit from that because we get stability. We land that contract long before the summer ever rolls around. We can plan around it and be at one location for a long time. So that has value for us. So we're able to bring the price down as the project gets bigger. I recommend that you set a target profit margin that each project should produce. So profit margin equals the profit divided by the revenue times 100. So in other words, it's the share of the money you bring in that you actually get to put in your pocket after you've paid all your costs. So if a project costs $1,000 to do the project, and we get paid by the customer $1,500 to do the project, that means we have a gross profit from that project of $500. 500 divided by 1,500 times 100 means we had a 33% profit margin on that project. By the way, I tell our affiliates we should be shooting for a different profit margin than 33%. And that, I'm afraid, is a proprietary thing I can't share with you unless you're a Goats on the Go affiliate. But the point here is set a profit margin you would like to make on every project, then assess your costs, and then set your price for the project so that you get that profit margin. So this picture is straight out of the Goats on the Go affiliate training. It's a picture of Woody Allen. I put it in every training I do because I love this quote of his: 80% of success is showing up. And pros show up every day. That means if we're going to start a business, we're going to answer inquiries from customers. We're going to respond to emails. We're going to respond to phone calls. We're going to deliver quotes when we say we're going to deliver quotes. We're going to show up on time. If you're not prepared to be a pro, if you're not prepared to learn about the vegetation in your area and learn how goats impact it, and learn about how to better communicate that to customers, and learn about profit margins and all that sort of stuff, then don't launch a commercial targeted grazing business. This is more than just taking your farm to a different location and charging a customer for it. There's a lot to it, and you got to be all in. But if you are all in and you are ready to be a targeted grazing pro, and here's my little pitch to you, we would love to have more Goats on the Go affiliates all across the country who benefit from our training and our brand and our findability online. So my contact information will be at the end of the presentation here. We would love to talk to you. Here's a sample profile page from our website. Each affiliate gets their own little profile page on our website where customers can contact them. This is Molly out in Oakland, California. And I just released a new book. It's only available as an audiobook right now. It's called Goats for Good, Making Goats Profitable for Your Farm, Your Community, and the World. One thing we haven't had time to talk about yet is how you integrate all of this targeted grazing business stuff into actually operating a farm where you raise goats. How do you make that and other goat enterprises all work together to be profitable and keep you in the game? That's what this book is about. So you can find that at goatsforgood.com. I also host a podcast all about the working dogs of farming and ranching, so livestock guardian dogs and herding dogs. So if you'd like to check that out, farmdogpodcast.com, or you can find it on any podcast app that you might already be using. Okay. Thank you so much for listening. I am going to be here as long as you have questions. I'm going to hang out. So let them fly.
All right, thanks so much, Aaron. If you would just go ahead and, well, leave your screen up for a second, folks. If you want to screenshot that, we'll also his information. We'll also have it in the recording. Okay, yeah. Now, if you'll go ahead and unshare your screen, I'll share mine, and we'll move on to our Q&A. We've got a lot of really wonderful questions, so I'm excited for us to get to those. Okay. Does that look right? Yeah, okay. All right, so I'll give a moment for folks who haven't yet put their questions into the Q&A to do that. And while we do that, I am going to launch a quick poll. All right, there we go. This is just helps us when it comes to finding funds to keep these webinars free. So just if you would quickly take a moment to answer these, we'd really appreciate it. While that's going, Aaron, I saw a couple of questions in here about what to do when there's tons of vegetation. How do you get the fencing in there? Are you doing, bush hogging? Are you weed eating? How do you make that work?
Mm-hmm. Great question. This is a hotly debated topic among our Goats on the Go affiliates. We have a private Facebook group where we ask each other questions and share information and compare notes. My personal opinion is it is almost always faster, but probably more frustrating to just lower your shoulder and push through the vegetation and get that fence up one way or another. It's a short but frustrating moment to get through most of the places where we have to do our grazing. And it just saves so much time to do that. Some of our affiliates would choose time over frustration. And so they are using the little DR like brush cutter, walk behind brush cutter. It's about the size of a lawnmower, but designed for brush. That seems to have caught on among our affiliates a little bit, as well as weed whacker style things, but with a disc cutter on the end instead of the whips. Again, though, that takes a lot of time. And though it's frustrating in most places, I can get through those spots a lot faster. Our goats are very well conditioned to the electric fence. So even if we have some vegetation leaning on the fencing, first of all, that doesn't short out the fence as much as you would think. And second, even if the power has dropped a little bit at first because of all the greenery touching the fence, our goats are busy eating. They are not exploring the fence line. So that tends to work well.
There was another question that's just related to that further down that I want to get to. In light of that electric netting shorting out with excess vegetation, Brittany asks, she says, in my personal experience with electric netting, it's nearly impossible not to have it short out in at least one or two places. Realistically, how do you manage weeds and grass touching the fence? And in high fire risk areas, is it safe if pulsing energizers are used? How much do you allow for fence touching vegetation, and am I overthinking it?
Yeah, so it's because boy, it's gonna be hard to say this without sounding like a total jerk. Um, you use it a lot day in, day out, over and over, place to place, and you get good at it eventually. Like you don't even realize that there's another level of how good you can be at employing the fence. Um, so do we have vegetation like grass, wet grass and stuff short out the fence sometimes or suck the power down a little bit lower than we'd like? Yes. But remember that we're always moving from one place to the next quickly. Like we might only have goats in an enclosure for 3 days, and then we're setting up the next location. So as we go and stomp down a place for that fence to go, um, by the time it's popping back up and kind of shorting things out again, we're on to the next location anyway. So having to constantly do a new fence setup means you can get it up and working well enough for that few days and then move to the next. Um, and yeah, you just get good at looking for the same problems over and over again that you can prevent. As far as fire risk, I don't know of any fire risk because of the electric fence. And um, the nature of these fences is that they pulse every like second and a half. It's not a constant stream of electricity, and so they're quite safe. I've never heard of that being a concern. If it were a concern in any location, again, I go back to we need to condition these goats really well at home first. Our goats could be behind a fence for 3 days on fresh vegetation and never know it's not on because they're that well conditioned to it.
All right. Our next question is, how important is breed to their effectiveness? I know there are a few breeds that are more ideal for clearing, but how much of a difference is there?
I think that what's much more important is how the goats were raised and conditioned. You can take any breed of goats, and as long as it's been raised up, having to go out into a pasture-like environment and choose from a variety of vegetation types for to gather its own meal, and not been fed every day of its life with a bale or a bucket or a bag, then the breed really doesn't matter. This is a hardwired thing in goats to want these types of food. Um, but you can beat that hardwiring out of them if they're raised their whole lives not having to do it. Now, when it comes to like hardiness and durability, I think that there are some breeds that are better than others. Generally, crossbreeds. I like the meat goat types. I think that they're a little sturdier, and we don't have to worry about a large udder that you might on a dairy nanny. But beyond that, I just am not too uptight about breed.
What do you do about drinking water for the goats on site?
Yep. Um, Originally, for a lot of these suburban sites, we would work with the customer about using like the residential water that's on site, the garden hose tap or whatever at the foundation of the house or another outbuilding. But over time, we've just gotten to be so to where we're always carrying a bulk tank of water in the back of a pickup anyway, and a bunch of hoses. And so we found that almost all the time now, we're just using our own water, providing it. As long as we can get within a reasonable distance of just a very simple water tub that we put on the ground, and we can just gravity flow that out of the back of the truck. If there's good water on like surface water from a creek or a pond, we'll absolutely use that if it's convenient to do it. But again, we're just always set up with water. And so unless we are really in the back of beyond on a property, we don't have to get very creative.
Right. Um, do you have a vendor or retailer for virtual fencing that you'd recommend?
Well, to my knowledge, there's only one that makes collars, makes the units for sheep and goats, and that is No Fence. Um, so without there being a lot of competition out there, I don't know that I could really recommend one except just by default. I think that No Fence has been the leader so far. Um, and so generally, I'd put my money on the horse that's winning. Um, But who knows? I'd like to see more competition out there. I think no fences technology is very close to being ready for prime time. Um, and I think they're headed the right direction.
Have you had issues with predators or dogs, and how have you dealt with that both in prevention and response?
If you ask me what keeps me up at night, I am worried more about the neighbor's Labrador Retriever than I am about coyotes or bobcats or mountain lions. Now, if you live out west, different story. But um, wild predators approach that electric fence cautiously and usually touch it with a nose or an ear, and then back off. And we're constantly moving from place to place. So by the time the predators figure out there's something new there that they might be interested in, and then they scope it out and stake things out for a little while, by the time they get bold enough to do anything, we are often moving. Whereas the neighbor's Labrador is just going to bound right in there and go right through or over the fence. Um, and then start running the goats around. Not picking on Labrador retrievers, by the way. We could substitute any companion breed of animal in there. But yeah, that's why the pet domestic dogs are a bigger worry for me.
Yeah, that's a great point. It does seem like a lot of traditional problems that you might have on your own farm are kind of solved by this thing of they're constantly moving, they're constantly getting fresh food that they're excited about, so they're not trying to get out as much, and you're constantly moving the fencing so it's not getting shorted out.
Yep,
Of
exactly. In
course,
fact,
it comes with all those problems, the
yeah,
difficulties of figuring it out, but it helps too.
I, goats will find ways to get themselves into trouble no matter where they are. They don't know if you're getting paid for it or not before they decide whether to get in trouble. Um, and so the risks are different on a targeted grazing project, but I don't know that they're greater than they are at the farm.
Our next question is, how small scale can you get with a herd if profit isn't a limiting factor?
Yeah, you know, entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs because they're innovative and creative, and you might be able to come up with a business model that can make this work with 5 goats. I have trouble seeing that. And so I generally tell people if you get much below 20 goats, it's going to be hard to be profitable. And this is a time business. We think it's a goat business. It's not, it's a time business. We've got a certain amount of resources that we have available to apply to a customer's project. So therefore, we can't take that bundle of resources and take them to the next project and get the next check until the first one is done. So in order to speed things up, we have to have more goats. So a bigger herd. There's only a few ways you can speed up a project in order to fit more into your schedule, and more goats is the obvious answer in most cases. It is possible to take too many goats to a project. You know, our customers want to enjoy the process. The idea that this is fun and novel is at least part of their decision making to hire us. And so if we roll in with 150 goats to do a quarter acre in an afternoon while they're at work, we've used too many goats. We didn't satisfy all of the customers' needs.
How do you deal with toxic plants and vegetation in the area being grazed?
You start to realize that you're being called to deal with the same 4 to 6 plants over and over and over and over again, oftentimes mixed together on a site. And so it gets pretty mundane, honestly, but occasionally you will stumble across a site that has like ornamentals that have escaped the landscape bed, or a customer who wants you to eliminate all their landscaping so they can start over. And those are pretty exotic plants. In those cases, we will turn down a project if there's too many plants that we can't begin to identify them. Generally, though, our goats graze the same things over and over and over again. They get really good at knowing what's good for them and what's not. So I trust the goats more than I trust any of those internet lists of plants that are poisonous to goats.
I like that answer. We've got a lot of repeat questions and a lot of questions to get through, so I'm just kind of looking through and seeing if I'm removing your question, I apologize. It's because I've seen somebody else ask the same question. I want to make sure they can all get answered. This first one is an LGD a must-have? Is that livestock guardian dog?
Yeah, livestock guarding dog. We have livestock guarding dogs that we use on the farm and on a very occasional, very remote, very large project. But generally, I'd say that livestock guarding dogs cause more problems than they solve.
Mm.
And so for most of our projects, they stay at home. You probably also have a question in there about donkeys and llamas as livestock animal guardian animals. They have the advantage of eating some of the same things as the goats and not needing such different care. And but they kind of have their own problems and their own challenges. So generally, unless that mini donkey just gets on the trailer with the goats automatically wherever they go, I'd probably leave the guardian animals at home.
Mm-hmm. We've got a couple of questions about using sheep and then using a mix of sheep and goats. I saw that you have sheep on the go, but mostly you were talking about goats. Could you touch on that?
Sure. We and our affiliates often use sheep depending on what the site calls for. Usually what we're doing is adding a few sheep to the goats to speed up a project that has a lot of that grassy herbaceous vegetation. Out west, if we're dealing with a lot of grassy, dry vegetation as potential wildfire fuel that we're trying to bring under control, your herd may be mostly sheep. I still think that goats are the most versatile and they engage the public like no other animal does. So I tell our affiliates that that should probably be the majority of your herd in most cases. Sheep have their place, and we do have that sheep on the go trademark for our affiliates to use. And mostly what we're doing there with sheep is targeting solar sites, solar installations. It's kind of a whole different ball game. But in that case, goats have the potential to cause problems chewing on cables and climbing on solar panels and that sort of thing. So sheep tend to be the right animal in that situation.
So we're getting close to 4 o'clock. You did mention that you were willing to stay a little bit longer to answer questions. Is that right?
You bet. I'm here
Okay,
as long as you let me be.
okay, wonderful. So we'll answer. I don't know that we'll be able to get through all of these, but we'll definitely get through the bulk of them. Yeah. Let's see. Do you recommend business-wise that the goat grazing operation is maintained separate from the farm, or just for the purposes of cost breakdown?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess my initial reaction is yes, I think it's best to keep them separate, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. Even if they're one operation in terms of your legal business entity status, you still should do all of your price setting and projections and forecasting as if they aren't, as if you are literally going to write a check for the use of the farm's livestock trailer to the farm, for the use of the farm's goats to the farm, for the use of the farm's truck to the farm. That should at least be in all of your numbers when you're trying to figure things out. Otherwise, what you're going to end up doing is mooching off of your farm's resources, which will lead you to set a price that is too low because you have mooched things that you think are free that aren't free. It all has a cost. And so I think that even if money doesn't actually change hands, like you don't hand it from your left hand to your right hand, you should do it on paper.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We've got a couple of questions about the type of fencing that you like to use if you have a go-to brand that you recommend. That's something you're willing to share.
Yeah, all of our affiliates use electric netting. When they use portable electric fencing, they use electric netting from Premier One Supplies. I think that they make a great product and their customer service is excellent and they ship quickly. They also get a discount if they're an affiliate on that stuff. As far as, you're going to go to Premier One Supply's website and there's 1,000 different models, and I can't be specific about the model we recommend, except to say that what works on your farm is tall and heavy and sturdy because you don't want to move it or reset posts every 3 days. But we don't operate like that. We carry this stuff up and down hills and through the woods and across creeks and 2 and 3 at a time under our arms. We want short, light, and simple. So that should guide you if you want to try to figure out which model we recommend.
And then you talked about insurance for this. What kind of insurance should people be looking out for? Not necessarily brand, but like
Yeah,
what kind? There's so many kinds of insurance.
sure, sure. The key is that it be commercial liability insurance. Can you insure your goats in case they die? Sure. Can you insure your car? Yes. But what we're concerned about is if something bad happens related to your commercial grazing operation and you get sued, are you protected? Um, who will pay for the landscaping that gets ruined at the neighbor's house if the goats get out? Um, that's what we're looking for is commercial liability. And typically your farm policy is not adequate for that. Now, there are some farm policies that you can add on a rider or some additional like farm business coverage. And that can be a really great place to start. But you need your agent needs to know that you are taking live animals to someone else's property and charging for the service. And so that's key when you have those conversations with a insurance agent.
All right. Mhm. How do you manage biosecurity, especially if you need more goats and are looking at renting from the guy with goats?
Great question. So, like very pragmatically, I would keep the herd separate. So,
Mm.
you've got 20 goats, you're doing really tiny projects, but the local parks department wants to hire you to do 6, 7 acres. Well, now you go rent 40, 50, 60 goats. I would just keep them in a separate herd. That solves a lot of headaches unrelated to biosecurity, but it's your best bet at biosecurity. Now that means you need to deal with biosecurity along the way too, like your trailer. So are you going to thoroughly clean out and disinfect your trailer before you load up somebody else's goats? Um, are you going to have the other goat producer who's leasing the goats to you deliver them to your site for you? Are they going to come back to your farm? And if that, in that case, what do you need to do about those facilities? Those are challenges. And when I said earlier that I don't know that the risks are greater by being out doing these projects, they're just different. That's one of the ways in which they are different is that we are commingling animals sometimes. We have less control over that sort of thing, over biosecurity. But honestly, the bigger biosecurity issue is that we're going off farm and we're running goats in places where white-tailed deer are high in population, maybe some other animals. So we have the potential to pick up meningeal worm, for example, and other diseases that probably wouldn't be quite the same concern back at the farm.
In that same vein, what vaccine protocols do you follow for your goats? Do you supply mineral blocks within the targeted grazing area?
Good question. Yes, mineral block is the easiest way to provide mineral supplementation on these projects. I know a lot of people don't like blocks, but you know they're the feasible way to do things when you're staying mobile and portable all the time. We are raising a targeted grazing herd and a meat goat herd that we want to be as hands off as possible and as low maintenance as possible. Currently, I'm only giving one vaccine, and that is a mastitis vaccine before kidding. I'm not even giving CDT. That's at my own local farm. You need to give the vaccines that you think are best in consultation with your veterinarian. But there aren't even a lot of vaccines out there that are on label for goats, that are tested and developed for goats. So you don't have a lot of options anyway, but we try to minimize it as much as possible. As far as supplementation of nutrition, we find in the Midwest that a lot of the projects we do have fantastic vegetation that is really nutritious if you study those plants. So we often don't have to supplement at all. If we're called to do like graze some prairie planting in August and it's gotten very mature, we'll definitely use like a protein tub or something to supplement the goats while they're on that project.
So Aaron, I'm sorry, I have a follow-up question to that. So you're not concerned about blackleg? Because for us in North
Oh,
Carolina, blackleg is an issue, and so you don't vaccinate for that?
we do not vaccinate for that. That has not been an issue in my area. And that's why I can't really give broad advice because every region has its own things generally. But no, we don't vaccinate for anything until we feel like we have to. And so, yeah, that's just been our approach.
And you're not worried about, just them clearing out sort of junky areas where they might get cut on, like, so tetanus issues or anything like that?
Yeah, so like when you ask if I'm not worried about that, I'm worried about everything with goats. Anything can kill a goat.
Yeah,
You
life
know,
can go.
yeah, they come into the world looking for a way out. So
Yeah.
yeah, I am, but I also know that if I'm going to have hardy goats that get better, I have to challenge them in some ways. And so we are not trying to preempt every sickness and every disease out there. We call for goats that are hardy, and if we vaccinated or treated or culled for everything that can kill a goat, we would have no goats. So, or we would have no money.
We've got a question asked a few different ways by people, but basically the gist is what do you do about leaving the goats overnight and how much on-site supervision is necessary?
So when you quote a project, if you're going to start a targeted grazing business, I would recommend that you have like a rough structure for how you're going to price, but every site needs to consider all of the costs. Again, every project needs to consider the costs. And if you have a site that is particularly sensitive or particularly exposed to the public, that is an increased cost in the form of risk. And so you need to charge for that cost. So if I'm going to be at a public park, I'm not going to sit there and monitor it 24 hours a day unless the public park requires me to. But I am going to go check it twice a day instead of once. And I'm going to schedule those checks for the jogging hour before work, right? And the afternoon walk hour after work. I'm going to be there when the most people are there. It's also a great opportunity to talk to people and tell them about what you're doing and promote your business. So no, I mean, every site needs to be treated different and evaluated differently, but generally, the vast majority of our projects we check once a day. Keep in mind though that our model for our affiliates across the country is a territory model built around where those folks live. So their response time to a problem on a project is pretty brief. We're not doing projects that are 6 hours away from home.
Okay, I'm just gonna do a couple more of these questions because we're getting a little late. But a couple of Goats on the Go specific questions is one, is there a cost to being part of Goats on the Go? And does Goats on the Go offer mentorship? Basically help figuring out starting out a business.
Sure. Yep. There is an annual flat fee to be a part of Goats on the Go. And a big part of what one gets in return for that fee is mentorship and support beyond the initial training. The initial training is great, but we and the rest of the affiliate network are there as a community to support you all through your business. One of the great things about Goats on the Go's model is that nobody ever has to start with a blank canvas. Whether you're talking about a piece of promotional literature you're trying to draw up, or a question about blackleg, right? We've got a network all across the country of people who have dealt with different things. And so you're never alone and you're never starting from zero.
So that's great. Okay, well, I'm gonna close us out here. Thank you so much to everyone for such lively discussion and participation today. I love when we have lots of questions. Sorry we didn't get to every single one, but I think, Aaron, thank you so much for staying past time and answering those extra ones. Like I said before, this recording will be available, will be sent out to you in an email tomorrow, and also be on our YouTube, as well as the slides. And then we'll send links to our upcoming webinars and other opportunities for farmers and ranchers in that follow-up email. So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Aaron. I think everyone is going to get a lot out of this presentation. We really appreciate you spending this time with us today. So thanks, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.